The galaxy's first reaction to the Empire rising was not celebration. It was more concern, confusion, and resistance. On Alderaan, that resistance took the form of protests, brief, courageous, and ultimately suppressed. But those early voices mattered, because in them, we see the roots of the rebellion. Now, this book is far before Andor. However, I do believe it just embellishes even more the start of the rebellion. Now, when the Republic fell, and all of this information is coming from the book Dark Lord: The Rise of Darth Vader by James Luceno, the Galactic Empire rose in its place, and the reaction across the galaxy was not one of instant submission, of course, as we know. Though many Outer Rim territories were either too war-weary or resource-dependent to resist, core worlds like Alderaan reacted with skepticism, fear, and briefly, public defiance. In Dark Lord: The Rise of Darth Vader, Alderaan is portrayed as one of the first systems to express concern with the new Imperial regime. Though the change in government is initially masked in constitutional language, framed as necessary emergency restructuring in the wake of separatist treason, the local population is not unaware of what has truly happened. Now, the novel describes protests in Alderaan, which is the capital city of Alderaan, as early as the first week after the Empire's formation. James Luceno writes this on page 250. In the wide boulevards of Alderaan, civilian protests had begun to form, quietly at first, but with visible banners and spoken chants that challenged the legitimacy for the Empire's sudden rise. This quote confirms that while there was no coordinated military uprising, the people of Alderaan responded almost immediately with nonviolent demonstrations. These protests were not born out of economic desperation or revenge. They were ideological. Alderaan had long been known as a center of diplomacy, cultural preservation, and political progressivism. Its citizens were deeply loyal to the ideals of the Old Republic. They saw the rise of an authoritarian regime not as security, but as betrayal. Now, Senator Bail Organa was a central figure in, of course, both Revenge of the Sith and in this novel, Dark Lord: The Rise of Darth Vader. He plays a very complex role during this early unrest. While he sympathizes with the protests, he knows that overt support could endanger Alderaan's long-term ability to resist the Empire from within. On page 253, we get this excerpt here. Bail could feel the weight of their cries from the windows of the palace, but he kept his face unreadable. If he moved too soon, he'd sacrifice Alderaan's ability to help later. This passage shows the delicate balance Organa maintained, appearing neutral in the Senate while quietly gathering intelligence and positioning Alderaan as a future hub of rebellion. As the protests grew, so did the Imperial presence. The novel confirms that the stormtrooper garrison stationed on Alderaan, originally clone units transitioned into stormtrooper armor, responded to these demonstrations with preemptive crowd control tactics, including surveillance, dispersal patrols, and arrests. This can be found on page 255. Stormtroopers patrolled the major intersections of Alderaan, rifles cradled, their helmets now uniform white. Citizens began to vanish in the night. Activists, professors, outspoken students. This early repression marks one of the first mass crackdowns by the Empire on a core world population. Unlike outer systems where resistance would be crushed militarily, the Empire on Alderaan used targeted suppression, seizing leaders, disrupting communication, and seeding fear among would-be organizers. By the time Vader himself arrives on Alderaan in the novel's final act, the city is tense. The presence of the Emperor's enforcers cast a long shadow over a population that had once chanted in the streets. Now, while this book focuses primarily on Alderaan, it implies that other core worlds responded in similar ways. The transformation of the Republic into the Empire was not seamless. Citizens questioned why clone troopers now answered only to the Emperor, why the Jedi were declared traitors, why the HoloNet no longer reported freely. This reference on page 248 can show you the shift in tone. Rumors flew through the upper levels of Coruscant. Questions were whispered in cantinas. Even planetary governors asked quietly if the Jedi were traitors. Then, why were they still mourned? This line suggests that even within the Empire's core systems, its official narrative wasn't universally accepted. The Jedi had been admired, respected, and in many cases loved. The idea that they had all suddenly turned against the Republic was implausible to many, even if they were too afraid to say it aloud. Now, these protests didn't last, in my opinion, because they feared force. The stormtroopers were pretty intimidating, and the civilian groups that were there that were outspoken weren't equipped to resist the military. I also believe that there was a lot of disinformation. Like, the Empire's control of the holonet allowed it to suppress the truth of what had happened in the Jedi Temple and on Mustafar. The political collapse with the dissolution of the Senate's influence and the death of key dissenting voices like Padme were a major reason why much of the political class fell silent. Now, there was hope in organizing, like Bail Organa, who chose long-term resistance over short-term defiance. He was playing the long game here. And I mean, in the end, it didn't really work out too well for him, but, he tried his best. He believed that survival meant secrecy. These protests, they didn't fail because people didn't care or didn't try. They failed because the Empire was ready. It had anticipated unrest, and it silenced it before it could spread. I hope you guys enjoyed this video, and let me know what some of your favorite parts are and what you would have hoped to have seen in perhaps Andor or some other show that would portray the early rise of the rebellion and how the galaxy really responded to the Empire. Until the next video, remember the Force will be with you always.